There I was, sitting on my sofa, watching my cell phone vibrate frantically on the coffee table as if it were going to explode at any moment. The names flashed across the screen like in a bad family horror movie: mother, father, Marcos, my older brother. The device danced with the intensity of the desperate calls. And I just watched with a smile on my face, arms crossed, feeling that dark satisfaction grow in my chest. 6 months. 6 long months since I had left my parents' house without much fuss. No shouting, no slamming doors. I just grabbed a backpack with some clothes and my laptop and walked out the front door, as calm as someone going to buy bread. It was the end. Or at least it should have been. But here they were, invading my space again, bombarding my phone as if I still owed them something. As if my soul was still family property. My name is Sam, I'm 29, I work in finance, and until 6 months ago, I was my family's private ATM. The straight-talking kid who never gave anyone a hard time, unlike my brother Marcos, 33, the eternal child prodigy who couldn't hold down a job for more than 3 months, but who, in some miraculous way, never let our parents down. I picked up my cell phone and read my father's last message: "Why didn't you pay the mortgage this month?" I felt that bitter smile forming on my lips as I typed the reply: "I thought you weren't welcome anymore." I sent it and put the device back on the table, knowing exactly what was coming next. 3, 2, 1. The phone exploded. Messages, calls, notifications flooded the screen like a dam that had just burst. It was chaos. A beautiful, perfect chaos that I was enjoying watching from the sidelines. To understand how I got here, you need to know the full story. Imagine this. While my brother Marcos dropped out of college at the age of 20 to find himself, my parents applauded as if he were an enlightened philosopher. When he was fired from 3 jobs in a row because they didn't recognize his creativity, they shrugged and said that times are tough for everyone. And when, at the age of 31, he returned to my parents' house with no job, no plans, just threw himself on the sofa as if he had earned the right to do absolutely nothing, they welcomed him like a lost puppy. Me? I started working at 16 in a snack bar after school. I saved every penny, graduated with a scholarship and working night shifts, got a solid job as soon as I left college. Did they celebrate? Of course not. A muttered "good job, Sam" was all I got. Because that's what I did. I was the responsible one, the reliable one, the one who didn't need looking after. Love in our home came at a price. And I learned early on that they would charge when they wanted to. My mother, Linda, would sigh dramatically when I visited. "Things have been so hard lately," in that shaky Oscar-worthy voice. My father, Carlos, would drop casual little bombs. "Marcos is trying so hard, he just needs a bit more time to settle in," as if I should agree and help. I saw the game. I knew what they were doing, planting those seeds of guilt. And I let them, because what else do you do when it's your family? I never asked them for a penny. I built my life from scratch. But guess who asked again and again? Marcos, returning home with nothing to show for it. And guess who they expected to help when the bills started piling up? Me. Always me. I started paying small bills. Then the purchase of the month. Then came the mortgage, temporarily, my father said. But the temporary extended, month after month, until I was covering practically everything: utilities, food, the house payment. While Marcos continued on the sofa, controller in hand, beating video game records as if he were doing us all a favor. If you like this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because what follows is the final straw that made me stop being the good son and start planning my freedom for good. Then came that Sunday, 6 months ago, when I finally reached my limit. I had just finished a brutal week at work, eyes burning from analyzing spreadsheets, bank accounts still sore from the last family bailout, and I stopped at my parents' house as usual. Arms full of shopping bags because I knew they wouldn't have bothered to stock the fridge. I barely put the bags in the kitchen and noticed the heavy atmosphere. My mother was sitting in the living room, arms crossed, looking like she was about to explode. Marcos sprawled on the sofa, fiddling with his cell phone as if nothing mattered. My father in the kitchen, shaking his head as if I had already disappointed him. "We need to talk, Sam," said my mother, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. My father stepped forward, hands in pockets, all casual. "We've been talking and we think it's time you contributed more. You make a good living and it's not fair for us to struggle while you live on your own, spending your salary as you please." I blinked, trying to process it. Because, what? I was already contributing. "I'm already helping," I said, keeping my voice steady. My mother let out a sound of contempt. A few bills here and there, that's nothing compared to what we need. My hands closed into fists, nails digging into my palms as I tried to keep calm. I've been covering the mortgage for 2 years. That's not nothing. That's when Marcos rolled his eyes. Come on, bro, you know they've done a lot for us. It's just money. And I burst out, turning my gaze on him. Us? I don't see you paying anything. This set my mother off, her face contorting. Don't talk to your brother like that. He's trying his best. I let out a laugh, cold and humorless. Really? Because the way I see it, all he's trying to do is set a world record for hours wasted doing absolutely nothing. My father interrupted, voice cutting. Sam, we're asking you to take responsibility. The house is too much for us alone. If you were a good son, you'd take responsibility. Something broke inside me at that moment. This final, abrupt break, after years of giving them everything, my time, my money, my patience, and it still wasn't enough. Let me understand, I took a deep breath. You want me to take over the mortgage completely, pay for everything, while Marcos continues to do nothing, and you don't see anything wrong with that? My mother's lips thinned. We just thought that, as our son, you'd like to help your family. And what is Marcos? A decorative plant. Marcos stood up, glaring at me. You're a selfish idiot. I picked up my bag. Me? I didn't ask for this, but I certainly benefited from it, didn't I? My mother stood up, anger emanating from her. If you walk out that door, don't bother coming back. I stared at her for a long moment, then smiled. Fine. Just like that. And I left. No shouting, no big speeches. It was just over. What nobody knew was that I had been preparing for this moment for months. It wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision, it was the culmination of a carefully thought-out plan. 3 months earlier, after yet another financial emergency that drained my savings, I turned to Rafael, my coworker in the legal department. He referred me to Amanda, a lawyer specializing in family and financial issues. You're not the first in this situation, she told me at our first meeting. Families can be the worst financial leeches. With her help, I began to meticulously document every penny I had sent to my parents over the last few years. Bank statements, receipts, text messages asking for money, everything was cataloged and filed away. We arrived at a figure that made me dizzy, more than 85,000 Brazilian reals in the last 2 years alone. That's financial abuse, Amanda stated categorically. And you have it all documented. Meanwhile, I secretly rented an apartment, transferred my remaining savings to a new bank account, and organized the silent move of my most important belongings. All this while continuing to help my family, looking like the same old Sam. When my mother told me not to come back, she believed that I would never have the courage to leave for real. They saw me as weak, manipulable, someone who would always give in to emotional blackmail. What they didn't know was that, for the first 3 months after I left, I was talking to the bank about the mortgage I was supposedly paying. The information I received was shocking. Although I was sending money regularly, the payments had been overdue for months. Where did all that money I sent go? I asked Amanda at our last meeting. She smiled, filling in some documents. We'll find out. And when we do, they'll have to account for it. So now, 6 months later, with my parents and Marcos desperately calling nonstop, I finally had what I needed, concrete proof that they had embezzled the money I sent for the mortgage. But what would I do with this information? And how would they react when they found out I knew everything? After 6 months of deliberate silence, I decided it was time for the final showdown. With all the evidence in hand, my lawyer Amanda on my side, and a meticulously devised plan, it was time to end the farce once and for all. I ignored the frantic calls for another 24 hours, until I finally answered with a simple message. I'll be at your house tomorrow at 2 p.m. to talk about the mortgage. Everyone be there. My father replied almost instantly, Thank God, son. I knew you wouldn't abandon us. I smiled bitterly at the screen. They still thought I was the same manipulable Sam as ever. The next day, I parked in front of the house where I grew up. Amanda was in the car next to me, document folder in hand. Ready? She asked. I've never been so ready in my life, I replied. We got in together. The look on my mother's face when she saw a stranger with me was priceless. A mixture of confusion and barely concealed irritation. Sam, who is this? She asked, trying to maintain the sweet tone she used when she thought she could manipulate me. "This is Amanda, my lawyer. She's here to discuss some important legal matters." "Lawyer?" My father frowned, panic beginning to show in his eyes. "We don't need lawyers in the family." Marcos, who was sprawled on the sofa as usual, finally straightened up, looking nervous. "Come on, bro, it's not that big a deal." "Not that big a deal," I repeated calmly, putting my briefcase on the coffee table. "Let's see if you still think so after our conversation." Amanda opened her briefcase, taking out an organized pile of documents. "Mr. and Mrs. Santos, I'm afraid we're here to discuss a very serious matter. We have substantial evidence that you embezzled funds sent by your son Sam, specifically designated for the mortgage payment on this residence." My father's face paled. That's ridiculous." "Is it?" I asked, opening my own file. "I have here records of bank transfers totaling 85,000 Brazilian reals over the last 2 years, specifically for the mortgage payment. However, according to the bank, the mortgage has been in default for 8 months. Where did that money go?" My mother began to stutter. "We've had expenses, medical emergencies." "Interesting," said Amanda, sliding another document across the table. "Because here we have credit card statements showing purchases in luxury stores, the latest electronics, and look, a trip to the beach that you took 3 months ago, while you were telling Sam you couldn't even afford food." Marcos jumped up from the sofa. "Are you spying on us? That's an invasion of privacy." "It's not spying when you're the victim of fraud, Marcos," Amanda replied coldly. "By the way, we found some interesting transfers to your account too. 2,000 Brazilian reals a month, while you were telling Sam you were looking for a job. It was like watching a house of cards collapse." My father tried to change tack. "Sam, we're your family. You can't sue us." "Actually, he can," Amanda interrupted. "And we've already filed the lawsuit. Embezzlement, family fraud and financial abuse. The bank has already been notified of the situation and is cooperating fully with our investigation." My mother began to cry, her crocodile tears that had worked for so many years. "How can you do this to us? After all we've done for you." "And what exactly did you do for me?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "Manipulated me, stole my money, made me feel guilty for not wanting to be your private bank account?" That's when my brother tried another approach. "Dude, if you do this, we'll lose the house. We'll have nowhere to go." "That's your problem now," I replied calmly. "The same way you told me 6 months ago when you kicked me out." The meeting continued for another hour, with Amanda calmly explaining the legal consequences of their actions. Foreclosure was just the beginning. They would have to return all the embezzled money, plus interest and moral damages. My father tried to negotiate, to offer settlements, even to beg, but I stood firm. "You have 2 options," I finished, standing up. "Immediately pay the full amount you owe me, or face a lawsuit that will expose all this publicly." "We don't have that kind of money," my mother shouted in desperation. "Then sell the house," I suggested. "It's that or the courts." As we were leaving, with my parents and Marcos in a state of shock, my father made one last desperate attempt. "Sam, don't do this. We're your blood." I turned around slowly. "Blood? Family? That meant nothing when you were stealing from me for years. Now you're going to find out what it means to face the consequences of your actions." A week later, I received the news that my parents had put the house up for sale in a desperate attempt to raise funds before the lawsuit went ahead. Marcos suddenly found a job in a convenience store. Funny how the threat of facing a judge can motivate people who have spent years unable to work. The best part? The neighbors, friends, and family who had heard for years that I was the ungrateful son who abandoned his family now knew the truth. Amanda made a point of sending a formal letter detailing the situation to some key relatives that my parents used as emotional support in their manipulation games. Aunt Clara, who had always been more sensible, called me crying, "Sam, I had no idea. They told us a completely different story." As I watched the castle of lies crumble from afar, I felt not revenge, but liberation. They were finally facing the reality they had created. But what would happen after that? What would my life be like away from them, truly free for the first time? And most importantly, was there any chance of redemption for a family built on such deep lies? 3 months after the confrontation, My parents sold the house for well below market value. They had no choice. The process was progressing and the bank had already started foreclosure proceedings. They moved into a small rented apartment on the outskirts of town. Marcos, miraculously, kept his job at the convenience store, although he still complained constantly on social media about how working is capitalist exploitation. As for me, my life took a complete turn. Without the financial weight of my family on my back, I could finally breathe. I invested the money that used to go down the drain at my parents' house, and with the help of Raphael, the same colleague who introduced me to Amanda, I started a small financial consultancy business aimed at people who, like me, were trapped in financially abusive relationships. "You have a natural talent for explaining complex concepts," said Raphael after our first talk together to a group of young adults. "Your personal story connects people in a way that cold numbers never could." The business grew rapidly. In 6 months, I hired 2 employees and became a regional reference in financial education and economic independence. The social networks I created to publicize my work accumulated thousands of followers, people who identified with my story and were looking for guidance in similar situations. And it wasn't just strangers who noticed the change. My extended family, who for years only heard my parents' side of the story, began to see the truth. Aunt Clara became one of my biggest supporters, sharing my posts and even referring clients. "You're helping so many people, Sam," she told me over lunch. "I'm proud of the man you've become, despite everything you've been through." One day, I received an unexpected message from Victor, my cousin who had always been close to Marcos. He wanted to meet up to clarify a few things. I accepted, more out of curiosity than anything else. "Uncle Carlos and Aunt Linda are broke," he told me over coffee. "Marcos lost his job again, and they can't pay the rent anymore." "And why should that be my problem?" I asked calmly, stirring my coffee. Victor looked uncomfortable. They're asking if you could help. Just until they stabilize." I let out an incredulous laugh. "After everything, they still think they can use me as a lifeline." "They're really sorry, Sam. Aunt Linda cries every day." Interesting how regret only shows up when the money runs out, isn't it? I took a sip of my coffee. They've had decades to treat me like a son, not a bank account. Now it's too late. That evening, my mother called me for the first time in months. I answered, more out of curiosity than anything else. "Sam," her voice was thin, almost unrecognizable. We made mistakes." "Mistakes?" I repeated. "You stole from me for years. You manipulated me. You threw me out when I no longer wanted to be exploited. Those aren't mistakes, they're deliberate choices." "But we're your family," she pleaded. "Family doesn't steal from family. Family doesn't treat one child like an ATM while pampering the other to ruin. You weren't my family, you were my parasites." There was a heavy silence before she spoke again. "It's all falling apart, Sam. We have nowhere to go." "Maybe you should ask Marcos for help," I suggested. "After all, he's the child prodigy, isn't he?" I heard a muffled sob. "He abandoned us. He said it wasn't his problem." I felt a hint of dark satisfaction. It seems I've learned something from my older brother after all. I hung up feeling a mixture of emotions. There was no happiness in seeing people suffer, even those who had hurt me. But there was a deep sense of justice, of balance restored in the universe. 2 weeks later, I published my first book, Financial Liberation: How to Recognize and Escape Financially Abusive Relationships. In the dedication, I wrote, "To my parents and brother, who taught me the hard way, the value of financial and emotional independence." The book became a regional bestseller, and the talks multiplied. For every story I shared, dozens of people came to me with similar experiences. I was helping them do what I did, cut the ropes that held them back and find their own way. A year after the confrontation, I met my father by chance in a supermarket. He looked aged, smaller somehow. Our eyes met in the fruit aisle. For a moment, I thought he was going to run away, but instead he approached me hesitantly. "You look good," he said, glancing at my well-cut suit. "Life is better when you don't carry the weight of toxic people," I replied simply. He nodded, looking down at his worn-out shoes. "Your book." I read it. That surprised me. You were right. About everything. He took a deep breath. I don't expect your forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I understood the lesson. I looked at the broken man in front of me and realized that I no longer felt anger. Just nothing. Indifference is truly the opposite of love. I hope you can rebuild your life, Dad, I finally said. I really do. As I walked away, I realized the most powerful truth of all. My revenge wasn't to sue them or expose them. My revenge was to become someone who no longer needed them, financially, emotionally, or psychologically. Someone who could look back without pain, only with the clarity of someone who has learned their lesson and moved on. My parents tried to use me, to suck every last penny out of me, and when I refused, they tried to make me feel guilty. But in the end, it was they who lost everything, not just a house, but a son who would have done anything for them if only they had shown him a shred of respect and genuine love. If you're in a similar situation, remember, the best revenge is never to repay evil with more evil. It's to build a life so good, so full and so free that those who tried to pull you down can only watch from afar, with the bitter regret of someone who has lost something truly precious. And if you liked this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories of people who, like me, found their liberation in the most unlikely of ways.